In the summer of 1990, a young British traveler stepped onto Australia's Hume highway with nothing but a backpack and the belief that the country still had real adventure left in it. Then a friendly driver pulled over, reached under his seat, and pulled out a gun and a rope. What happened next wasn't just one man's escape. It became the missing puzzle piece that would later expose one of the most horrifying serial crime cases in Australian history. If you're sensitive to real-life tragedy, you may want to stop here. In the summer of 1990, Paul Onions arrived in Australia chasing the kind of freedom he felt the Navy had promised him but never delivered. At 24, he'd already built a stable life back in Birmingham, working as an air conditioning repairman. Yet stability felt like a cage. Australia, to him, sounded like the last wide-open place where you could still stumble into a real adventure. Long roads, big skies, strangers who might become friends for a few miles. He landed in Sydney in January 1990 with a backpack and a loose plan. At a hostel, he heard about fruit-picking work in Mildura, far inland. It sounded perfect. Earn cash, see the country. So he took a train toward the outskirts of the city and aimed himself at the Hume Highway, expecting to hitchhike the rest of the way. Paul stopped at a roadside shop to buy a drink. A man approached him, introduced himself as Bill, and nodded at Paul's pack like it explained everything. Bill offered a ride. Paul accepted with relief. The first lift is always the hardest, and this one arrived without him even raising his thumb. They climbed into Bill's truck and headed west. The first minutes were ordinary, small talk about England, Sydney, and where Paul was going. Then Bill's mood shifted. He launched into an ugly rant about immigrants and foreigners, the kind of anger that doesn't come from a bad day, but from something deeper. Paul didn't argue. He gave short answers and tried to let the topic die. It didn't. Bill's attention narrowed onto Paul, and the questions started coming like a checklist. Where exactly are you going? Who knows you're going there? Is anyone waiting? Did you have special forces training? Paul's instincts tightened. The questions weren't curiosity, they were sizing him up. Paul kept his answers vague and his tone polite. He didn't want to provoke the man who controlled the vehicle. About an hour in, Bill slowed and pulled off to the shoulder. He said the radio signal was fading and he wanted to grab cassette tapes from under the seat. The excuse didn't fit. There were tapes in the console, and if he wanted something from under the seat, Paul could have reached for it without stopping. Bill got out and opened his door. Paul's nerves spiked. Without fully deciding to, he stepped out too. Half to stretch, half to keep his options open. Bill snapped, demanding to know what Paul was doing. The reaction was so sharp that Paul felt he'd tripped a wire. He climbed back into the passenger seat and clicked his seatbelt, trying to act calm. Bill climbed in holding a couple of tapes. For a brief second, Paul wondered if he'd misread everything. Then Bill moved again, fast and deliberate. He reached down and came up with a handgun. Bill's voice went flat. He told Paul it was a robbery. In his other hand was a length of rope. That detail hit harder than the gun. Rope means you might not be seen again. Paul didn't negotiate. He unbuckled, shoved the door open, and ran. The Hume Highway was busy. Paul sprinted into moving traffic with his arms up, trying to force someone to stop. Cars swerved around him. Behind him, a sharp crack split the air. Bill fired. The shot missed, but it erased any doubt about Bill's intent. Bill caught up and grabbed Paul, and they fought in the roadway as vehicles veered away at the last second. Paul felt himself tiring, then pictured the rope again and surged, wrenching free and stumbling toward the next vehicle like he'd rather be hit than taken. A van approached, driven by Joanne Barry. Her sister was with her, and 5 children sat in the back. Joanne saw Paul running toward her and a man behind him with a gun, and she slammed on the brakes. Paul yanked open the sliding door, climbed inside, and begged them to go. Joanne didn't hesitate. She reversed hard, swung the van around, and sped back the way she'd come. As they pulled away, Paul looked back and saw Bill standing in the road, smiling. Joanne drove straight to Bowral and went to the police station. Paul explained the gun, the rope, and the shot. Joanne backed him up, but the response was casual. Without a last name or a license plate, the officer said there wasn't much to be done. Notes were taken. No urgent patrol was sent up the highway. Paul left feeling like the danger had been filed away. His backpack, passport, money, everything was gone. He got help from the British embassy, replaced his documents, and cut his trip short. Back in England, he tried to move on, but the memory stayed sharp. The rope, the gun, and that grin. Nearly 3 years later, in late 1992, Paul opened a newspaper and felt his stomach drop. 2 backpackers had been found dead in Belanglo State Forest in New South Wales. They were young, traveling, and from the United Kingdom, like him. The article included a small map, and one of the towns printed on it was Bowral. Paul read the report twice. His highway attack didn't feel like a strange one-off anymore. It felt like a warning he'd barely survived. In the months that followed, more remains were found in the same forest, and investigators began to see a pattern: backpackers disappearing along the Hume highway corridor and later being discovered in remote bushland. A task force formed. Warnings went out. Tip lines opened. Joe and Barry, recognizing the connection, called police and retold what happened in 1990. In Britain, Paul saw coverage with a hotline number and called immediately. When detectives asked Bowral police for the original report, none could be found. No official record existed. Yet the officer who spoke with Paul years earlier still worked there, and she had kept the notebook page where she'd written down key details. It wasn't much, but it confirmed that Paul's story wasn't new. Paul described the attacker: muscular, handlebar mustache, and a look that reminded him of a well-known Australian cricketer. Around the same time, another caller reported that years earlier a man fitting a similar description had tried to abduct her and a friend near Bowral. Investigators focused on a suspect whose name kept resurfacing: Ivan Milat. He came from a large family with a history of crime. He had prior allegations involving backpackers, and his work often placed him along the Hume Highway. He also spent time hunting in Belanglo State Forest. Still, suspicion isn't proof. Police watched him, built timelines, and searched for a break. That break arrived when Paul traveled back to Australia in 1994 to meet the task force. They laid out mugshots. Paul's finger stopped on Ivan Milat without hesitation. That identification gave police probable cause to arrest Milat on charges tied to Paul's attack and to secure search warrants. When investigators searched Milat's property, they found personal items belonging to the victims and .22 caliber weapons consistent with evidence from the forest. Milat denied everything, but the case moved forward through hearings and then trial. Witness testimony, forensic links, and recovered property built a picture the jury couldn't ignore. In 1996, Milat was convicted and sentenced to multiple life terms, plus additional time for the attack on Paul. For Paul, the verdict carried a strange aftershock. The man who smiled on the highway hadn't been a random danger. He'd been part of a pattern that ended in the forest for others. In court, the story of that single failed abduction mattered because it showed intent. The gun and rope weren't just threats. They matched the method investigators were already piecing together. Paul's calm, consistent account gave the task force a living witness, not just a collection of grim scenes in the bush. It turned fear into a timeline they could prove finally. And the most unsettling thought is how close it came to ending that way for Paul, too. One stranger hit the brakes. One man chose to run. And years later, those moments helped turn a near miss on a highway into the key that finally unlocked the truth.